Hello students, hope you are safe and doing well. Today we will begin our video with a very interesting lesson how the first letter was written. But before starting actual story, let me tell you about the author of the story, Joseph Rudyard Kipling. He was an English journalist, short story writer, poet and novelist. He was born in India, which inspired much of his work. Rudyard is remembered for his stories and poems of British soldiers in India and his tales for children. His children's story included The Jungle Book and Just So Stories. And present lesson is also taken from Just So Stories. This story is about a Neolithic man who used to use tools and weapons made up of stone. Now let us see our main characters of the story. Tegumai Bobsulai. He was a Neolithic man who used to live in a cave with his wife Teshumai Temindro and daughter Tuffy, who was bold and expect the stranger to do her work as she wants. Another main character is a stranger man, who is Tawara, who was very hasty in his nature. So let us begin the actual story.
Kipling's fiction, How the First Letter Was Written, is a story of a family who lived in the Neolithic age and how accidentally they invented a new way to communicate through drawings. This Neolithic family had three members: Tegumai Bobsulai, the husband, whose name means man who does not put his foot forward in a hurry, means a very calm and composed man. His wife, Teshumai Temindro. Her name meant a lady who asks very many questions, means someone who is very curious by nature. They had a daughter named Tuffy-mai Metulamai. Her name meant a small person without any manners who ought to be spanked, means a child who lacks manners and must be slapped. One day, Tegumai, along with his daughter Tuffy, went for fishing to a Vagai river to spear calf fish, means a long fish found in the fresh water for dinner. But when Tegumai tried to jab it hard to catch a fish into the river, he accidentally broke his spear. Unfortunately, that day Tegumai had forgotten to bring extra spear with him. So he was in a messy situation since he was miles and miles away from home, and on the other hand, it could take him half the day to mend the broken spear. So Tegumai simply sat down to mend his broken spear since he had a little leather mendy bag. Just then a stranger came along the river who belonged to a far tribe, the Tawaras. He did not understand the word of Tegumai's language. He stood on the bank and smiled at Tuffy because he had a little girl daughter of his own back home. Tuffy called the stranger and asked him if he knew where her mummy lived. Since the stranger couldn't understand a word, he couldn't reply. At that time, she saw a shoal of fish in the river which they couldn't catch, so she stamped her foot in disgust. Tegumai asked Tuffy not to trouble the stranger without turning around or even looking at the stranger. The stranger sat next to Tuffy and she showed him what her father was doing. The stranger thought that Tuffy was a wonderful child and she was quite bold. Also, she stamped her foot and made faces too at him. So, stranger got up and look a big flat piece of bark of a birch tree and gave it to Tuffy. He did this so to show that his heart was as white as birch bark and that he meant no harm. But Tuffy didn't understand. Since she couldn't write, she thought that if she had anything to scratch, she could draw pictures at least. Since the stranger couldn't understand anything, he didn't reply. So Tuffy put up her little hands and pulled the tooth off his necklace. So he gave Tuffy the shark tooth and she started drawing pictures on the bark. First she drew the daddy fishing with the broken spear in his hand. Then she drew another spear which they wanted. But while drawing, the shark tooth slipped from her hand and the picture looked as if the spear was striking in her daddy's back.